Hi everyone, it's Yvette Le Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to Feel Good from Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Dr. Tamara Rosier, who has been a college administrator, a professor, a leadership consultant, a high school teacher, a national public speaker, and an ADHD coach. Through those adventures, Dr. Rosier has developed valuable insight into ADHD and how it affects one's life. As the founder of ADHD Center of West Michigan, she leads a team of coaches, therapists, and speech pathologists to help individuals, parents, and families develop and learn effective skills to live with ADHD effectively. Her book, Your Brain's Not Broken, provides strategies for navigating the powerful emotional aspect of ADHD. Dr. Tamara Rosier, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here today, Yvette.
I'm so excited to have you here today with us and with our very special global audience. How are you today? Super grateful you're joining us for this conversation. I've had the opportunity to listen to your audiobook on Audible, and I really learned so much about ADHD, about your own journey, your clients, your work, words of wisdom, and hacks to help those living with ADHD. Before we dive into your book, are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
For my bio, you can really hear the ADHD in there. It means I get bored easily and I come up with new careers when I do. I mean, sure, I'm super old, but I have done all those things. If your listeners are listening thinking, I wonder if I might have ADHD, you might have ADHD if you get bored easily and want to move on to something new and shiny and interesting.
Well, I have to say, when I listened to your audiobook, I resonated with all of the things that are related to ADHD, the symptoms. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is me. I've never been diagnosed with a doctor. However, when you talked through certain things about scheduling, about when you get bored or you're not really interested in a topic, you find it difficult to apply yourself. But when you love a topic and you're so interested, you can go pretty much all day, all night. Like you're just so into it. And that reminded me of when I was at school. I really wasn't passionate about opera. And I honestly thought, well, this is a waste of time. I'm not going to be a bank teller and say, hello, Mrs. Brown, would you love take your money out? I was good at applying myself to what I really liked. But for someone who's tuning in and hasn't listened to your book or read it yet, what is ADHD?
All right, Yvette, I'm just going to nerd out just for a little bit, okay? So if your listeners take their fingers and tap at their forehead, that's where their prefrontal cortex is. And the prefrontal cortex is this wonderful modern amenity that organizes our lives. It's like this little conductor going, this will happen first, this will happen second. And it's this big organizer. The prefrontal cortex is the house of executive functions, meaning it's those modern things that we have to do to get by, like scheduling. Now, for those of us who have ADHD, that prefrontal cortex, in my book I write about, it's like a butler that tells you and directs things and organizes, lays out your clothes, and we don't have it working reliably. So technically, we have that part of our brain, but because of dopamine stores, we don't have it reliably. And so we go to a different part of our brain, the limbic system. And that's where the limbic system is the seat of fight, flight, or freeze. Well, those of us who have ADHD, we go between fight, flight, or freeze all the time, like, oh, I better hurry up and do this right because I'm afraid this isn't going to go well. Or we also do the opposite. We have the other fun, the other F word, fun. And so we're like, I want to do what's fun. And I want to avoid this pain, but to do the thing that's fun for us. And a lot of people misunderstand ADHD as, well, they're just fun seekers. They should just grow up. They treat us like we have Peter Pan syndrome. Well, it literally is a neurological difference. And so today I'm hoping that your listeners, maybe there's a really busy woman at home working with her kids and she's tired and there's way more laundry that can ever be done. And she's feeling behind in life and constantly overwhelmed. I'm hoping that maybe if she hears enough, maybe she'll start to wonder, I wonder if I have ADHD. A lot of ADHD women always talk about being constantly overwhelmed. And it's because we don't schedule well, we don't prioritize easily, we don't sequence activities easily. Life is hard when you don't have reliable access to that prefrontal cortex.
I can totally resonate, one, with the mountains of laundry that I have to do. Actually, it's out there waiting for me. Also, with the scheduling, I'm having to find that now I have to sit down and literally, if I don't map it out, write it in and have it in a written book, then in my phone, it just all goes pear-shaped. So I have to be so particular. Like, I can't just rely on my ability to go, oh, this day I've got this and that. For someone who's feeling overwhelmed, they just even have to schedule their basic stuff like drop off car, go
100%.
shopping. What are some skills or tools or things they could do to even schedule basic activities each day so they don't feel overwhelmed?
Before I answer that, I want to say those of us with ADHD, we have impaired short-term memory and working memory. And just as I was preparing for this podcast, I just happened to look over Friday's list because I write out my little list. I'm so dutiful. And I thought, I never picked up my cat's medication. And I'm like, that completely slipped my mind. Fortunately, I wrote it down. But that's a case of Friday was a little bit busy and I made a list. And guess what? I forgot to look at the list. Very typical classic ADHD move. Now, fortunately for me, though, at least I have it captured somewhere so I won't forget it forever. Because I don't know about you, I live in fear of forgetting things forever.
I got to list it out, like even basic things like need to pick up olive oil from the supermarket. Otherwise, I'll walk up with something else. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can resonate.
Yeah.
I've literally got to write it on a list.
Yes. Okay. So I can hear some listeners go, well, everyone does that. Yes. It's just that ADHD people do that consistently. It's because of our short-term memory. This weekend, I'm having a task around the house that involved following directions. And it was so frustrating because I would read the direction, go, I totally understand. I got it. Remember, I have a PhD. Yvette, I can do this, right? And I'd go, I read the directions. And then look at the pieces. And it's like the directions flew out of my brain. And it's because it's a short-term memory issue. And so I was so frustrated. At one point, I'm just like, I am the dumbest girl on earth. Which coach in me said, oh, hold up. We're not allowed to say that. We're not allowed to put ourselves down. And then I was kind of pouty. I answered myself like, shut up. I want to be that way right now. I was so frustrated with myself. And so a lot of women with ADHD are constantly and deeply frustrated with themselves. Like, why can't I pull this together? Something I think is spectacular about you, Yvette, you have learned how to be kind to yourself. And when things don't go the way you expected them, or let's say it, if you make an error, you're like, that's all right. I'm going to figure this out. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be on your show, is because you have this wonderful way of modeling self-kindness. And look at you. You're a professional. You've got your stuff together, but you're not sweating the small stuff. If there's listeners out there who are suspecting that they have ADHD, I want to say you're an excellent role model for your self-kindness and self-compassion. So the number one thing I would say to women is find compassion for yourself. I had to learn that really late in life. And I was incredibly unkind to myself. Just like I admitted when I said, I'm the dumbest girl on earth. I just was so frustrated. And then I had to stop myself and go, no, that's not kind. Stop, take a break, take a deep breath, and start to problem solve. And so a lot of times what happens with ADHD is we latch onto an emotion and we don't let it go. Has that happened to you?
Yes, I can resonate with that, especially over the last 2 years.
Remember, I'm in my limbic system when I was doing this project, and I'm in this limbic system and I'm getting frustrated and frustrated, more frustrated. And so I latch on frustration. And then once you latch on the negative emotions, then ADHD's like, well, I see that one and I can raise you to overwhelm. And then, oh, I can raise you to self-loathing. How about you just go straight to hating yourself now? And so because I am a coach and I work on my own ADHD, I took a deep breath. I'm like, okay, your medication wore off, Tamara. You're tired. You're latching onto an emotion. Let's take a deep breath and see if you can problem solve this. If not, it's time to stop for today. I would love to say I was that grown up and did it that quickly. It took me a little bit longer than I really want to admit, but I got there.
And thank you for your kind words about my self-kindness, because I've had to learn that over the years. I didn't know that having challenges with scheduling things into your diary, personal and work and life, could be just something that I struggled with. I just thought, oh, that's just me. I do know when I kind of write things down, at least I feel more in control. I can see what's coming up. But if I don't have anything written down, I'm an absolute overwhelmed mess.
Yes.
And I've just had to learn to be compassionate, like, oh, okay, that appointment didn't work out. That's all right. We'll just look at another time. We'll reschedule, and that's life. So as an example, I'll give you one. Last week, I had an appointment at 11:15. For some reason, I thought it was set 11 o'clock. I walked into the appointment. Oh, hi, I'm just here for my 11 o'clock appointment. And the lady goes, it was at 11:45. And I went, oh, okay. Oh, I thought it was 11. She goes, oh, that's okay. Must have been some communication correction. I was thinking, I thought it was 11. I'm positive I looked at that and it was 11. I even had it written down in my diary as 11. I had it in my phone as 11. And then I'm like, oh, shit, hang on a minute. It says 11:15. So my brain must have latched on to the 11, not the 11:45 part. Anyway, luckily I had my appointment and they were really kind to me.
Good.
There's a good example of how I read this and I didn't interpret it. And I have a bit of dyslexia as well. That's a prime example, I think.
100%. That is exactly what happens. Because our brain is like other people's brains. It wants to take shortcuts. The human brain is kind of made to take shortcuts because it takes a lot of energy to think. The problem with ADHD, without that full functioning prefrontal cortex, is our shortcuts just leave us in a swamp. Like, they're not shortcuts at all. And so we have to be so careful around things. Now, I love your story because it ends with someone being gracious to you. Think about how many listeners have had something happen where people weren't gracious.
I've
Because
had that.
what happens is that keeps chipping away. And let's say you're a young girl and you're trying to do your best, and people just think, wow, she's very careless and she's not very good at this. And those little comments start chipping away at her self-esteem. And then that little girl grows up and now she has half the self-esteem she should have because it's just been chipped away.
And I could share a story of that where I had a very important doctor's appointment. I mean, this is many years ago now. Just got the timing wrong by about 10 or 15 minutes again. The lady was so rude. Nope, you're late. We're not seeing you. And didn't offer to reschedule, and makes you feel really lousy. Yes, it was an honest mistake. I'm sorry, but you are right. If someone responds with compassion, that's okay. We'll reschedule. It does make a massive difference to your mental health and well-being, and it really is a gift when someone has compassion and empathy for you. You're so right.
I actually had a supervisor who was terribly unkind and who didn't like me. And I was good at most of my job, but what was important to her was the scheduling. I remember getting in trouble and thinking, why am I in trouble over this minor of a detail? It was, I had blocked out something on my calendar. I didn't block it all the way down to the hour mark, just to the 45 mark. She's like, where were you for that 15 minutes? I'm like, still at that appointment. And she's like, then why wasn't it showing on your calendar? Now, she's also was a control freak and all that, but she just kept after me where my weaknesses were. And I have to tell you, her voice got into my head for so many years. It was so painful. And I'm positive at least one of your listeners is going, oh, I've had that happen.
And when did you first discover that you may have ADHD?
I was in my first job in college. I was in teacher preparation, and we were required to take a class in what would be called neurodivergency today. And so I was reading through the textbook and I read about this thing. It was called ADD back then, because this was in the late 80s. And I read it and went, whoa, I have all these things. And so I called a family member. I'm like, hey, I'm reading a textbook and I think I have ADD. And that family member responded and said, no, everyone has that. This was correct, because everyone in my family does have it. But once I started to get out of our family circle, no, we all have ADHD. Both of my parents had ADHD. ADHD is very, very inheritable. So if you have one parent with ADHD, each child has a 50-50 shot of having it. Two parents with ADHD, well, you could do the math on that one. It's nearly 100%. And I went to teach high school, forgot about what I had read about ADD and myself. But then I found out I was really good at teaching this one population of student, and it was the ADHD student. And this is very honest. I couldn't figure out why none of the other high school teachers were having as much fun as I was having. Like, I loved my job, and my students loved the class because it was interesting and it was fun. And I kept thinking, wow, am I not growing up okay? Why am I having so much fun teaching? And now I look back, well, that was my ADHD. I loved what I did and I loved my students. So it was fun to me.
Wow. So you learned about it when you were studying. You then ring up a family member and they go, yeah, we've all got ADD, was back then.
Yeah.
And then from there, you obviously did more studying and learnt more about it. And then you had a genuine passion when working with the students. And is that then what led you into starting up ADHD, the Center of West Michigan, and coaching people and helping people?
Oh, no, that would be a straight path and a very straight sequential path. No. I hid my ADHD for about 20 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I became very embarrassed about it. I felt like it made me dumb. No, I have a PhD, but I always had a lot of imposter syndrome around that. So since opening up the ADHD Center, I outed myself as having ADHD. Definitely by the time I wrote the book, the world knows that Tamara has ADHD, but for a long time, it was a deep, dark secret that I hid. One of the reasons I wrote the book is because I was working with so many, especially women, who just felt such shame around their performance, even around who they were. And so I wrote the book to people who might still be kind of struggling with kind of, why am I always feeling like a day late and a dollar short? Like, why am I always like just in a marching band and I'm the one that's kind of out of step? Because that's what it feels like to have ADHD. I'm having more fun. ADHD people do feel like we have fun.
And that's like me. I know I have to pay my rent the same time every month. Yet, even if I write it in my book, I'm late. My landlords know Yvette's always going to pay, but she's going to be late. Seriously, I know this stuff. And then I go, I'm going to get so organized. I'm going to pay on time.
Yeah.
I'm going to get my shit together. And then I get my shit together for about a month or two. And then I fall off the wagon again. I'm like, I'm going to get my shit together again. my niece goes, "That's procrastination, Auntie." And I just go, "No, I just don't like paying bills, and especially rent."
She's a smart little woman there.
She's
So
clever.
you said something, and this is kind of the mantra of ADHD people. I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to get organized. We buy all kinds of books and planners, and we try to like beat ourselves into submission. And I have to tell you, we want to find ADHD friendly ways to do things because we can never do it like our neurotypical friends do, right? So can I give you an example with paying your rent?
Yes, please. For
Okay.
everyone tuning in, we're going to get some actual practical tips for our life. Here goes.
So you know when you have to pay your rent, right? And you have a reminder on your calendar. What happens when that calendar reminder goes off?
I think, oh, I'll do that later. I know I've got to do it. Oh, I'll do it after. I'll do it later. I'm going to do this. I'll do it later.
Yep. And that is the self-sabotaging behavior. So you're smart. You planned it. You're like, when this goes off, I'm going to do it. And so right there, you're just hitting the snooze button. And so all it takes is an agreement with yourself. I will not hit snooze on this. Just on this topic. Let's not go crazy. Where I see this pop up, I will drop what I'm doing and pay it. I want you to imagine two different Yvettes, okay? There's the business Yvette who just has her act together. She's delightful. And then there's equally delightful, but more messy and particularly interested in other things, Yvette, who is like, I'm not sure we need to write things down. And I know that we don't need to pay the rent right now. And so she's constantly chattering in your ear. And she's not bad, right? She's not a bad part of you, but we can't let her pay the bills.
Yeah, we can't because she doesn't pay the bills.
We get around to it. So we want business Yvette paying the bills. And so when that reminder goes off, ADHD version of you will go, well, I'm kind of in the middle of something much more interesting right now.
I always am.
Yeah, it could be sorting socks, and your ADHD self is going to go, this is way more interesting. And so it's going to take business in that going, listen, I am a grown-ass woman, and I am going to do this right now because this is important to me, and I'm going to follow this alarm that I set. And ADHD you is going to fight. She's like, but look, pink sock, pink sock, pink sock. Watch this sock. You're going to have this little battle. And so in this case, for you to decide, I promised myself I wouldn't snooze this one. And so it's just you saying, hey, ADHD Yvette, love you. Love you, girl. You're fun. But you know what? I got this one. And I'm going to do it right now. Do you hear the internal conversation?
Yes, I could so resonate with that because so many times I'll be in the middle of reading a really good book and the reminder goes off to pay rent and I go, I will do that later.
Right.
Yeah, do that later. You can do that later. You do that later. And then the later comes 3 days later and I've forgotten all about it because once I don't do it when the reminder goes off, 100%. The reminder doesn't go off the next day because I haven't got it scheduled in my diary. Yes. So that is such a good tip. And I'm going to do that. And I'm going to message you when it's done.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. So another tip is schedule it at a time where you know you'll be sitting in front of the computer. And so it just shifts it a little bit where you don't have to break from reading a book to paying. It's, I was answering email. I'll do this too.
That makes sense. And that is so beneficial. So for anyone who struggles to pay bills on time, you got to do them. I love that tip. So schedule it in when the timing is right, when you're not in the middle of doing fun stuff.
Right.
When I grew up as a kid, ADD was the acronym back then, attention deficit disorder.
Yes. Yep.
And all we ever heard was, if you have ADD or you've got ADD, it's that you have trouble concentrating. You can't focus a lot.
Well, it's actually too much attention disease. if I were to rename it. So for those of us with ADHD, I pay attention to everything, right? Which means I can't pay attention to one thing if I'm paying attention to everything. And so that's why it looks like we can't focus, is because I'm taking in so much information at once that it might not look like I'm focusing where I'm supposed to be focusing. So let's go back to school, and Yvette's sitting in classroom with poetry, and she's hearing the desk squeak next to her, and the fluorescent lights are buzzing, and that's, a lot of sounds coming through her ears. And then she's looking at the girl in front of her, and the girl in front of her has a braid that's kind of not right. Oh, should I help her fix that or not? And then she's looking at the clock going, when is recess again?
I remember that part.
And so she's looking all around. And then she's like, wow, this desk is very uncomfortable. I hate how it touches the middle of my back. And so all these thoughts are just bombarding. And it's a cacophony of sound in there. And we want you to learn poetry. Now, fortunately, by the way, medication can really help those of us with ADHD. I'm not pushing meds. Everyone wants to manage ADHD differently, but stimulants do work for 80% of us. Stimulants as in pharmaceutical, and I have to tell you, it's like a night and day experience. So there was a time I forgot I had ADHD. Okay, I was in my mid-30s. And I know in my 20s, I realized I had ADHD, but you just kind of forget for a little bit. It goes back to the back of your mind. But I did a lot of public speaking during that time and a lot of conferences. And I remember going to the bar of a hotel and asking for iced tea without ice. And I drink it right before I spoke. Well, that's a stimulant. I remember it would just calm me down and focus me. By the way, stimulants do the opposite for those of us with ADHD. They actually calm down our brain and just start to weed out all those extra thoughts into one or two thoughts. So it's funny because I was, in a way, self-medicating without truly understanding what I was doing. And then when I started to treat my ADHD, I went, oh, right. That was happening.
And do you find many people, now I'm 44, 45 this year, I have never in my lifetime, until I listened to Your Brain's Not Broken, learned anything about ADHD at school or even on mainstream media. It's been such an under-shared topic. And the whole notion now that every kid, because they're using technology, has ADHD and they're the generation of ADHD. I mean, that's a sort of blanket statement. It undermines ADHD itself, because it's kind of like saying, oh, everyone who now uses a phone has ADHD.
Exactly.
But that's not accurate or true.
So here's the sad thing about ADHD. It's serious. And for those of us, and I use this metaphor in the book, those of us with ADHD, it's like we're born missing half a leg. But no one can see that, and they expect us to run just as fast as everyone else. And we can't understand that we're missing half a leg, so we're falling all the time. And it's frustrating to have ADHD. But culturally, people can make fun of it. People will say, oh, I'm so ADHD today. Or, oh, whoops, ADHD moment. And I know my kids get very feisty around that comment. So ADHD is actually quite serious. Research has demonstrated that we live 13 years shorter than our neurotypical cohorts. 13 years is a lot. And this is on average. I'm not telling your listener she's going to die sooner, right? But average, those of us with ADHD live shorter lives. This should be a crisis. And so you're right. ADHD is a very serious thing. And yet people can just get mad at social media and say, well, everyone has ADHD because of social media or because of electronics. And that's simply not true. It's a neurological difference. And no, being on your phone doesn't cause ADHD.
I know even my niece pulled me up because I said, oh, I just listened to this audiobook and I think I've got ADHD. Everything I could resonate with. And she said, Auntie, you cannot say you have ADHD unless you are diagnosed with it. She's probably aware that there's a lot of people saying, oh, I got ADHD, but potentially they don't. So I do see that someone who's really struggling to just live a day-to-day life and not feel overwhelmed could really get their back up. Would you recommend someone who maybe thinks they have ADHD sees a psychiatrist or someone in mental health and have a chat to them?
It depends. And so women go really grossly underdiagnosed. And many women get diagnosed with anxiety. In my book, I talk about the relationship between anxiety and ADHD. It's a way that we can kind of hold things that are important. Women tend to go to a psychiatrist, and many will just see the anxiety without the underlying ADHD. So you may have a listener out there saying, oh, I'm constantly overwhelmed. I'm fighting this kind of shame response all the time, and my anxiety meds aren't working, which is a big telltale sign. Doctors will say, well, I certainly can't put you on a stimulant because you have anxiety. So I would really want to encourage that listener, do some reading, educate yourself, find someone who's going to believe you and see the ADHD. Especially if you start to believe you have it, really advocate for yourself. Do the research ahead of time, read books. My book isn't the only one out there. There's great books that can help you get a diagnosis if ADHD is interfering with your life. If it's not, just know that you have possibly a neurodivergent avenue that you go down and you're okay with it. Everyone who's actually struggling, I would love to get identified and actually treated for their ADHD. If they're already successful and ADHD isn't compromising their life, then they don't need to be diagnosed. Let me throw another little trick in here, though. It's even more problematic if you're very smart. So if you're a very smart female, the likelihood of someone catching you with ADHD is quite low. I'm working currently with a doctor, and she's a surgeon. So she's very, very smart. She just has realized recently that she has ADHD. And that's only because her son was diagnosed. And she's reading and she's still learning a lot, going, oh, wait, because she was reading the literature. It's like, this is hereditary. I have these traits. And so she went to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, no, you don't have ADHD. You have anxiety. And fortunately, she could advocate quite well and say, no, here's why I meet the diagnostic criteria. So high IQ women are really hard to catch because of their coping skills are so good. They've learned to cover their tracks. The other problem is the DSM, the diagnostic manual that we use to diagnose ADHD, is woefully behind. It's about 20 years behind research. And so psychiatrists are correct a lot of times saying you don't meet the diagnostic criteria. Well, it's the diagnostic criteria that's out of step now.
When we have, say, a teenager, how does ADHD show up for them in the overwhelmment part? And what are some things that a parent could maybe do to help their child if they're struggling with this ADHD?
We talked about emotional regulation in the limbic center and that we latch onto emotions. So when emotions of ADHD combine with the emotions of estrogen or testosterone, you get this really gross mess. And I work with a lot of parents who go, I don't know. Is he angry just because of the hormones? Is he angry because of this? And the answer is yes. And so what we have to do, you're going to see many of your children either go too far overboard with their emotions or stuff all of their emotions. Neither are good. I have a lot of parents who are like, you just have to talk to me. Well, that's not the answer either. What I tell parents to do is to stay put. Stay put and keep letting your kid know, look, I love you. I love you, kiddo. I am going to be there for you. And I will help you whenever I can. And you're giving this kind of message of, I've got your back and I will walk with you. but I'm not going to force myself on you. I work with a lot of parents who are just kind of wanting to swoop in, rescue their kid. And our job as parents isn't to rescue our children from every situation, it's to walk beside them. It's not easy to have an ADHD kid. Buying your high schooler yet another planner to write down their assignments in isn't going to be useful. You do have ADHD coaches in Australia, and I would suggest finding an ADHD coach.
Obviously, with COVID,
Yes.
it all becomes too much.
So first of all, COVID was just a train wreck for most of my ADHD high school clients. Their high schools would shut down for a little bit. They'd be all virtual, and then, oops, now we're back to school, and now we're virtual again. And it was just a train wreck, no consistency whatsoever. Now, there's few of my high school clients who were just like, oh my goodness, wait, I'll do everything virtually. People are finally leaving me alone. I'm nailing life. Those are the kids that thrived through COVID. They're just like, finally, I can just stay in my room, do my homework, and no one's talking to me. I can focus better. That's about 15% of the population. The rest, they were just so overwhelmed. Emotional regulation is the place to start parenting with your child. So this isn't a simple answer, but parents really want to rush to how can I help my kid do better in school, organize them. All they need is just some good organization. But the truth is your child actually needs emotional regulation techniques. And what to do with all the anger, what to do with the overwhelm, what to do with all that. And again, an ADHD coach would be spectacular. If you can't, find a counselor who can work through emotional regulation techniques.
That's so good to know. Emotional regulation techniques. You have really worked with so many people within your center. What are you finding coming up more and more since the pandemic has happened?
Anxiety across the board. Just anxiety that has gotten out of control. Remember, those of us with ADHD, I always say we have twitchy amygdalas, meaning like we're always kind of on the lookout for what's bad, what could happen. Well, we have the news just kind of bombarding us with every bad situation that we can think of. And ADHD kids are very astute. They pick up everyone's emotions. They read things, obviously. They see things on TikTok. And so they have this like generalized anxiety about the world. It doesn't really cross over into a generalized anxiety disorder in the kids I'm thinking about, but I'm seeing that in a lot of the kids. In the adults I'm working with, I'm seeing just a ton of the world is too much. It's just too much. And so these adults, a pattern that I'm seeing is I need to simplify my life. And so they're reading books on simplification, capsule wardrobes. They're thinking, how can I just make life simpler? And so that's a trend I'm seeing.
Wow.
Finally,
How can I make life simpler?
The last trend I'm seeing, and I'm hoping it's going to be the subject of my next book, is how do we get together and how do we work together when we have ADHD? Because being in quarantine with one another, we've had to figure out how to work together. That's coming up where how do I actually communicate with people when I'm emotionally regulated or they're neurotypical, but they don't understand me? How do we get together and how do we actually communicate?
When you mentioned a train wreck, I could truly resonate with that. Can you tell us what is the meaning behind your book title, Your Brain's Not Broken?
When we were working on titling the book, someone reminded me, they said, well, Tamara, I hear you say this all the time. Your brain's not broken.
Mm.
And I literally said, I do? I say that? And they're like, yeah, you say it all the time.
Wow.
And I do. It's something I say to my clients that I didn't realize I was saying. I'm like, your brain's not broken. It's wired differently. And so your brain is wired differently from other people's brains. So we need to figure out how it's wired. And then what do we do with that different wiring? In other words, let's find ADHD friendly ways to get the same stuff done, but let's find ADHD friendly ways to get it done.
Love that. So, Tamara, you help so many people. What are some of your own self-care rituals and how do you look after yourself?
So, first of all, I want to answer this in a non-ADHD. Well, I have the strict routine of this, this, and this. And, I have ADHD, so that's not going to work. So, all of my self care rituals occur when I have taught my body, like if I feel tense in the back of my shoulders, I'm going to do these self care rituals. If I feel tense in my neck, I'm going to do this. If my breathing's affected or my stomach, I'm going to do this. I'll tell you a couple of those things, but I had to teach my body to tell me what to do instead of get up each day at 6 and do something. And that's an example of my
Yes.
ADHD friendly approach. I have 3 things that I do on a regular basis. I practice Yin Yoga. I'm still new at it. Look, I'm at the YouTube level. I just turn on my TV, follow YouTube, right? But Yin Yoga is so slow that it really does reset. And something that I usually need, and those of us with ADHD need it, we need to reset our nervous system. Our nervous system's too twitchy. It gets too responsive. We look like one of those rabbits being hunted, like we're just like looking around. I use Yin Yoga to kind of calm down my entire body. Yin Yoga, I do it in between clients a lot of times in my office. So it's quite handy. The next thing I do is go for walks outside. And this has research. But those of us with ADHD, we love being outside in nature. It resets us somehow and kind of cleanses our brain. So that's another self-care thing I do. And then finally, I do something called EFT, emotional freedom tapping. Oh, you're nodding your head. Good.
I've interviewed a lady who teaches it. So, yes, very beneficial.
Very wonderful. And if your listeners don't know, they need to go back and listen to that episode of yours again, because actually excellent for those of us with an ADHD brain.
I have to say, I love Yin Yoga, and I've been trying to introduce it into my Sunday just to reset my central nervous system.
Yeah.
And I found it just so therapeutic, and it's so juicy and so beautiful and really calming. So when you were saying that, I absolutely love going for walks in nature. And when it comes to EFT, I have interviewed Dr. Peter Stapleton. He is an EFT expert.
Yeah.
She's here in Australia and she swears by it.
Yes. If I could just remind your listeners, teach your body to tell you when you need to do things. So your body is going to tell you, wow, I just have knots in my stomach today. And learn to respond to your body like, oh, I should do tapping when that happens. Or I can't tell you exactly how to respond, but you'll learn how to respond to your body. A lot of us with ADHD, we kind of ignore that we have a body sometimes. I don't know about you.
It's interesting that you mentioned you tune into your body and respond to what's needed, because I do that as well. So if I have a sore neck, neck, or shoulders, I'll go, right, I need to do yoga for shoulders. If I'm feeling stressed or anxious, it'll be like yoga for stress and anxiety. If I'm feeling sad, yoga for sadness, tight hips. So I kind of tune into what's needed, but I didn't know that. My younger self, 20s, I had no idea about tuning into your body and then doing what your body needed or what you need. I had no idea. I think it's only as I become more self-aware, doing yoga and meditation and tuning in and then responding.
Yes. That's
so it is a good practice, and it makes sense when your hips are tight. Oh, I got to stretch my hips.
Exactly. If you think you have ADHD, don't set yourself up for failure saying every night at 7 p.m., I'm going to do yin yoga. You're just hurting yourself at that point.
I absolutely agree. I've tried that. It does not work. I feel like I'm this spiritual being in flow. It's like, oh, I feel like doing this now. I can also tune in. Sometimes I might only do, say, a 15-minute yoga practice because that's all I need.
Exactly.
And I'm okay with that. I figure it's better than 0 minutes. I have a saying, 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes.
Yeah.
But I did used to be obsessed at one point, but it was too hectic. It was too stressful. I was my own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Then I beat myself up if I hadn't done the 45-minute walk that day, and it wasn't a good place to be. I've had to go
Yeah.
with the flow, and I love how you do that. What is your hope for your newfound book readers or your audio listeners?
I really want them to know their brain's not broken. There's really nothing wrong with you. If you're reading the book for yourself and you're reading it like you did, Yvette, and went, oh, holy cow, this is speaking to me. You're not broken. And there's help if you want that. But just even learning some of the hacks that you could do just to improve your quality of life. So my biggest hope is that people learn to really love themselves.
Love that. Your biggest hope is that people really learn to love themselves. I don't want to give the book away, but I've listened to it while I was walking and it was great. I did it audible because I could fit it in, walking outside, listening to the book. And there is a lot of case studies, a lot of stories that you've shared, real life stories with your clients. There's also talk about the monster spray. I don't want to give the book away, but I felt that was an incredible technique where you can really look at the ADHD as that monster spray and then reframe the way you really speak to yourself.
Exactly.
And that inner dialogue I felt was firstly so important. So instead of beating ourselves up, how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
So I have an author's website that I believe the publisher is adding more to on a daily basis. And that's tamararosier.com. And then I have a website of my business, miadhd.com. And I'm on Instagram with the help of my lovely daughter. I'm old, she's not, it works. And that's under Dr. Tamara Rosier.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tamara Rosier, for all of the work you do, for your dedication to raising awareness for ADHD. Thank you.
Thank you for being so delightful. I just so appreciate you. So thank you.
I appreciate you too, and we love you and super grateful for your time. Bye!
Bye.
Thanks for listening into this Spirit Girl podcast episode. I hope you found this conversation of benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Le Blowitz Spirit Girl podcast. Also leave a 5-star rating and a review of what you think too. Share this show with your family, friends, and community. Be sure to subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com, YvetteLeBlowitz.com, and to follow Spirit Girl or Yvette Le Blowitz on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.